Thank you all for being here, and thank you for one hell of a movie. Edward, I'll start with you. I mean, obviously this book was written almost 100 years ago. There's been, there was a very famous English language adaptation of it. This is the first German language adaptation of a book that was written in German. Why this movie now?
There were many reasons. First of all, a good friendship to my producer, or our producer, Volker Edward, who called us, who's also here. And I'm very grateful for that call about 3 years ago, because he called me and said, would you be interested in a movie, in a German adaptation of All Quiet on the Western Front? And I immediately thought, if a movie would interest me, that would be it. However, I was also scared of it, of course, because of the legacy, because you can really screw it up. And so I thought that's a good challenge to try to not screw it up. So I went home and talked to my family at the dinner table. And my kids, they listen to that, or they actually don't listen to it. They immediately get up and walk out and think it's completely uninteresting what we're going to do next. And so I talked to my wife, do you think that's a good idea? And my daughter, she hears the title, and she whips around and says, All Quiet on the Western Front, you have to do it. I just read it at school. It's a book that touched me most, and I cried 7 times, and yeah, it's a must. So that was a big reason, because I thought if after 90 years a book still has an effect on a 17-year-old girl, back then 17, then it still has relevance. And the other reason is that we often see American or British war movies because that's where they're usually made, because where you can get the financing. And I always feel they're great, but they're told from a very different perspective. And the perspective is that of the victor and someone who was in the right, defending their country, America being roped into 2 wars, liberating Europe from fascism. And that leaves a legacy of, in a way, of pride and honor. And you can think of your grandfathers and honor them in a way. And in Germany, that doesn't exist. It can't exist. What exists is a sense of shame and guilt and horror and responsibility towards history, hopefully at least. And that's within us. So that's within the DNA of the generations to come. And so that DNA informs the films that are made in America and that are made in Germany. And hopefully they look, as regards to the war, very different. And I thought that it might be an interesting addition to start a dialogue. Yeah?
Daniel, what was your experience with the book? I mean, you were born in Spain, but you basically grew up in Germany, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So I read this book at school first time, and it was had a huge impact on us as kids. And it was a book that we wanted to read. We didn't feel that we were forced to read something that we were not interested in. It inspired us and moved us, and it made me want to reread it when I was in my 20s. And then my father was a documentary filmmaker. He did a documentary about Remarque, about the writer, so we also at home talked about this writer a lot. So and then I joined Malte Grunard's production company, Amusement Park Films, back in the days, because I got interested in directing and producing, and we both were always looking for interesting German material, stories that would have an international appeal. And so he called me one day and said, yeah, there's this new adaptation of All Quiet on the Western Front, but we should do it in German. It has never been adapted in its original language. And that was a real epiphany. And I read the script, was quickly very intrigued in playing Matthias Erzberger, because this is a new storyline that is not in the book, but that I found very interesting. to open it up, to give it more political and historical context, but also dramatically speaking, cinematically speaking, it's an interesting dynamic at the end that you go back and forth between the vastness of death and horror and these gigantic imagery to these very claustrophobic scenes in the train. And you could think it's a relief to leave the death behind and go to the train. But at the same time, it's so shocking to see these men being so clean and polished, eating their croissants, and not being willing to end that madness. And so to play the guy who's the only human voice in that bunch was appealing.
Volker, had you had experience with the book? I mean,
yeah, I read. Yes, I read the book, and I read the book, and at the same time, the story was for me very interesting, because when I was in the age of the boys, we in Germany we could decide between military and civil service, and I had to go in front of a committee and explain why I was going to decide for civil service, and I had to explain that I have ethical reasons to not go there. So when I watched the first time the film, I felt very attached to that they decided to go there with their free will into something where they felt maybe they go to a kind of camp or party or whatever, and then they find out that they are getting trapped and they can't get out. And I thought that was it reminded me of that whole process of decision making when I was around 18, and when I thought about what do I tell the people in the committee, why I don't want to kill or shoot at people, and that dimension of that decision and of that letter that I wrote that time, I think that was going into the music in the whole dimension of composing something for the war machine in a way, and composing something that is nearly a religious theme of the amount of time that we are on Earth. So I wanted to find a dimension between those two poles.
Edward, I want to go back to something that Daniel brought up, which is this idea, the scenes with the German High Command are not in the book, they're not in the Louis Milestone movie. What was important to you to bring those scenes into this version?
Well, the book was written 90 years ago, after the First World War, under the impression of the First World War, and before the Second. So Remarque didn't have knowledge of what was yet to come, and also the First World War, everything was still very present in the readers. Right? Now and also when the movie came out, the First World War just had happened basically. And now we're almost 100 years, or more than 100 years after the war. People forgot the Second World War very much overshadowed the First one. And we also thought, now with our perspective, especially in Germany, so this character, Matthias Erzberger, he was killed by nationalists later. The Nazis used he was basically, they used him as a scapegoat to justify the Second World War, because they said basically we would have, the military sent Erzberger to sign this treaty because they said because they didn't want to admit that they lost the war, and they later blamed him for losing the war, by signing this treaty. And they wanted to, so he was used as a scapegoat, he was killed, and I don't know where I'm going, but somewhere in the direction of...
But what is interesting is that Hitler, when he invaded France, wanted that very same train to be brought to him to humiliate the French and to sign their surrender. So that's why this moments in this signing of the peace treaty or negotiating the armistice is such a crucial moment in European and world history, what happened in that train and the consequences that it had.
And our perspective now is that this was just the beginning of a much bigger horror to come. And so that's why we wanted to include that in the film, which Remarque couldn't have known yet because the Second World War hadn't happened.
Daniel, for you, how much research did you do into the real guy, the real circumstances, all of that, and how important was it to you to get it right?
Very important, obviously, because I think we all felt an enormous responsibility in touching this holy material and keeping up with a literary masterpiece and then a great cinematic adaptation. So this, this meant a lot of pressure. I was a bit shocked of how little I knew about Matthias Erzberger, so I read his biography and was very impressed by this man because he came from the German South, Christian, devoted Catholic, provincial politician, very determined, climbed up the ladder and ended up in high politics in the German Reich, and was targeted throughout his career because he had a very strong, moral compass and values, and he opposed, for example, against the colonial politics of the German Reich, and never got intimidated by all the threats. Eventually, as Edward said, he got murdered and was instrumentalized as the traitor in history. And the other thing that I wanted to get right is the accent. I don't know if there's Germans here in the audience, because my wife's family is from Stuttgart, from the south, and it's a hard accent to get right. So my father-in-law had read all these lines for me, and I had them on my phone, and was listening to my father-in-law. He's a very serious man. And then I remember one scene that is actually not in the film anymore, that got changed, is that the wonderful, not so funny in the film, but a very funny man playing the general, called David Striso, a masterful actor, was so mean because we did the first rehearsal and I started speaking like that, and he said, "Oh wow, you really want to do it like that?"
And I'm wondering, I'm sitting there, there was a scene in the car, and I'm sitting there like, what's going on between these two guys? Daniel kept wanting to, let's do another take, because it was David sort of winding him up.
So when you're writing it or co-writing it, obviously the basic story, Paul and all of that, is fictional and it's from Remarque. But for the stuff that you added on the high command and all of that, did you feel more of a responsibility to be sort of more scrupulous?
Yes, it's actually very much taken from archival, like transcripts of the talks. Some especially between the French and the German, that those encounters are actually they're basically written in history books. You can just copy it. So we stole it from the archives.
So, Volker, your music scared the hell out of me when I watched this movie. I know you guys have done several projects together, but what was the initial conversation like about this?
Well, I saw the film, I think in October, the first time, and it was pretty much in a finished shape. And there was a little bit of temp music in there, like atmospherical temp music, but we didn't exchange much sentences, Edward and me. He just said, I want to have from you something very special that you've never done before. That was the first sentence. The second one was, I want to have destruction. And what was the third one?
Destruction of the images.
Yes, destruction.
So destroy the images. And the third one was like, what is in Paul's stomach?
Yeah.
Like, can we find a sound for the fear, the anger, or the rage?
So I drove back home from Berlin to Düsseldorf, which is a 4-hour train ride. And on the train ride, I was thinking, okay, I need an instrument from that time. That was the first thing. And I need a very short fragment, a melody fragment that I can use, that I can push always in the areas where I have space for the music, because if the melody is too long, it will always interfere with war sounds, with gunfire, with tanks. So I need an element that is, first of all, an iconic element that just comes in, and that I can, move wherever I want to have it. So on that evening, actually on the next morning, I went into my studio, and on the train ride, I remembered that I have a harmonium of my grandmother in the studio. I know that it was sitting there for a long time, but there was never a film where I could use it. So I thought this is an instrument that was actually played by my grandmother in that time, because harmoniums were used in German homes for playing Bach chorals, where we were singing together Christian songs, and there was a fireplace somewhere in the back, and then we were singing these songs. And I don't know if you know what an harmonium is. It's actually a kind of pump organ. You have some pedals on the floor, and they create a lot of wind. And then you hear then you have pedals on the sides which create a tremolo, so you can pull your knees like in those directions. And then you have a keyboard, and you have different registers. And one register says on my harmonium double bass. So you have one note, but you have also the octave lower. And so I used 8 microphones inside of the harmonium. I put microphones into the inside of the harmonium, so you could hear the harmonium like doing that, and then the knees were doing the crackling noise. So when it starts, the machine, the laundry is washed. I felt it reminded me of a kind of art house or an art film where nobody's talking, but you can see the images are very nicely shot, and the music needed to be a collage with the sewing machines, so that it becomes a complete composition with all the sounds that are in there. I sent it, actually, that little piece of I sent that to Edward on the next morning, and I would say that was the idea that I could give to the film, and I was very excited what he says, and if he would have said no, I would have been destroyed. And I had to come up with something else. So I waited for him to get back to me, and I got a phone call, and he said, "Volker, we're sitting here together. It sounds like Led Zeppelin." And I said, "That's a good sign." And from there on, he always said to me, "I want to have in that scene the Led Zeppelin sound. Can you do that?" So we have quite a nice language.
We had another one that I called the Neil Young sound.
Yes, the Neil Young sound. That was as well that was the one that had a kind of war horn, like nasal sound that when they are marching. That was it.
So was it instant when you heard it that this was something that was going to work?
It was immediately clear to me. I was so happy. I had, you get sent a little MPEG file and watch it on your computer first, and I immediately knew this is Led Zeppelin. And what I liked is, Volker said, first of all, it's the machine, and the movie is about the machinery of war. It was the first industrialized war with artillery and tanks. You see the young boys watching the tanks coming over the hill, and it's like a UFO, And so it was the industrialization of war. It was the machinery of war. It was about these children, these kids that become killing machines because they're, that's what you do. You have someone who's attacking you. You're either going to kill that person or you're going to get killed yourself. And in order to be able to do that, you have to kill everything inside of you You have to protect your soul and shut off all emotions, and that's what they become. They become these. You see in Felix's eyes in the end, in the last battle, it's like he feels nothing. There's nothing inside of him anymore. He's lost everyone, and he's lost all his emotions. And the lost generation came from that, the term of the lost generation. And so that music fit really well in that. And at the same time, I felt it really did feel like it was destroying the images. It was going against it. It wasn't beautifying. It wasn't sentimentalizing, over-emotionalizing. It wasn't telling you what to feel at a certain moment. It left still space for everyone to bring their own emotions.
I mean, the movie can be very hard to watch. I mean, it's a grueling sit, and it looks like it was enormously arduous to make, except maybe Daniel, who never had to get in the mud.
He knew why he picked that role.
So, I mean, how difficult was it to shoot those battle scenes?
It was extremely difficult for I think for the crew, who did an enormous, wonderful job. But also for me, I did feel the pressure of that book, wanting to live up to it. There's a scene, my daughter again, there's a scene where Felix is stabbing the Frenchman. And he, for the first time, he realizes that they're alike, they're the same. He looks death in the eye, or a dying person in the eye, and he realizes that's me. And my daughter had mentioned in that first initial talk, although we never spoke about the film again afterwards, she said, there's the scene with the Frenchman, and that was the best scene of the book. And so I knew I can't screw that scene up. And I really took them, instead of 2 days, I shot it for 4 days, because I was so scared to screw it up. So there was this pressure of getting it right, but at the same time, there were so many elements, actors running across the battlefield with old guns that then jammed after, at the end of a 3-minute take, you get everything right, and then the gun jams. And you have to reset everything. It takes an hour to get everyone back, and we didn't have much time. This movie was shot in 53 days. We didn't have much money. I spent 2 months in a hotel room, 2 to 3 months in a hotel room with James Friend, the cinematographer, storyboarding the movie and putting it up on the wall and looking at it, going through every single shot, going, okay, from here we go to there, that's the story. Okay, this doesn't work. Let's redraw it. Let's re-edit it on the wall, because we had not enough money to keep redoing it or wasting it off camera or cutting things out. Pretty much every shot that we shot is in the film. We cut out maybe a scene or two. The one with Daniel, that was one of them, and then another one. But everything else is in the film, and so it was all these elements: smoke, explosions, acting, the sun. The sun was my enemy. Because we started shooting in March. The film was done. We had to get done before summer came, and but luckily we had a very grueling spring with snow and rain, like you saw, and so summer came very late. But I kept waking up every morning and then hearing the birds sing at sometime in April, thinking, oh shit. The birds are coming. So spring was coming. Spring was the enemy. And I was thinking it's going to ruin the film. And luckily somehow we waited for overcast. But that was the pressure of getting all the elements together, and we had very long shots and takes where usually something went wrong, and somehow, as like in America, like it is in films, the very last minute you somehow get a take that works.
So Daniel, as executive producer, you couldn't lobby to not get your scene cut out of the film?
No. And in fact, please tell the truth. You asked me to shoot another scene because it was so brilliant.
No, and the reason why it was cut out, because it was terribly written. And it was, and I realized this. It was all information. And then when you and these wonderful two actors, they with bravery they delivered these lines, and I kept listening to it and thinking like, that doesn't sound right. And then in the edit, I realized
it wasn't the accent that didn't sound
no.
right.
it was the badly written informational dialogue that we then cut out, and then we shot another scene instead.
I want to open this to everybody, but it feels like we're in a time now where extreme nationalism has been on the rise, all around the world for a while. I mean, is that a reason to make this movie now? Is that a reason why this perhaps feels more timely?
About 3 years ago, when we started making the film, we noticed, when we decided we wanted to make the film, we noticed that there was government here, there was far right, there was in England, there was Brexit, there was now in Italy, a far right government in Hungary, in Germany, the far right was on the rise. So all over the world, parties or populists came into power that questions institutions that brought us peace for 70 years, especially in Europe, like the EU. And that antagonistic, those fights in the parliament, you felt, you could hear them on the streets as well. When I took the subway to work, to the edit, you hear it. You hear people suddenly talking differently, more aggressively. There's a different tone, and we thought it reminded us of the history lessons, how the time must have been 100 years ago, and so we did feel it was the right time to make this film.
Daniel, I saw you nodding.
Yeah, no, and I wish the film was less relevant than it is, because we could not foresee a war in the middle of Europe that we're witnessing right now. So I'm very pleased that so many people have watched the film, from what I hear, and young people. At the premiere in Berlin, I was saying to Netflix, please show the film at schools and remind the youth who play ego shooter games and watch different kinds of movies of the message of this book, that is a timeless and important one, that war is not cool, war is not an adventure, but war is horror and war is death. And so it's very important to reach also younger audiences and to then inspire them to read the book if they haven't read it, because it's a great read. It's very modern and timeless. And this man had been on the battlefields himself, the writer. So there's a lot of truth in that book.
Edward, I know we need to wrap up, but not too long ago, Paul Schrader said some very nice things about the film on Facebook, but he also said you can't.
He did? Oh, I didn't know.
But he said you can't make an anti-war film. All anti-war films, by their nature, glorify the machinery of war, and therefore they become pro-war films. And he said yours is the closest to an anti-war film he's ever seen, and it's a searing indictment. But he also said, but it still ends up being a pro-war film. I mean, is this an anti-war film?
It's for you to take that home. I can't decide for what the audience takes home. We try to impart the film with a feeling that we grew up with in Germany. That a feeling of what I said earlier, of the guilt and shame and the responsibility, and then we can offer this for you to watch, and then you have to take home the feeling that you take out of this movie. I can't decide. I don't want to be preachy or be messagey and say, oh, this should be anti-war, or anybody who's in their right mind is going to make a film that's not going to be pro-war. Hopefully we succeed in imparting a feeling that you can take home and think about for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I think the film speaks for itself. And I know we do have to wrap up. Edward, Daniel, Volker, thank you very much.
Thank you. There's one thing that I'd love to say. It's a wonderful turnout here. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. You can't believe what it means to us, to have a movie showing at the American Cinematheque. About 90 years ago, this movie, the original American movie, premiered in Berlin. And at the night of the premiere, the Nazis came in and put mice into the audience, white mice into the audience, so that people sort of left the theater, and then they banned the movie, the book was burned. And now to show our movie here, and to live in 2 countries where we can sort of show you the movie and openly talk about it. It's a wonderful thing for us. It really means a lot. Thank you.